This morning we're down in the north end in Boston, looking down Salem Street, which is one of the older streets in Boston. A lot of coffee shops, cafes, shopping places. It's got a lot of character, this street. The old north end is typified in Salem Street and Hanover Street. Sunny day, strong shadows. I'm looking down Salem Street and trying to unify the two shapes, tonally at least, through the building on the left, extending across the street and riding up the buildings on the left-hand side. I found this to be a very inspiring part of the composition, in addition to billboards and other things that were part of the scene. And as I'm laying in this first wash, I'm very much thinking about establishing that big shape and perhaps taking some liberties, the liberties that I am proceeding with here in my design are making the buildings feel a little taller, a little more compressed, the street a little narrower, and from that point of view, I'm modifying the basic shapes that are in front of me. Of course, I'm also aware of the light and the play of shadows, but I wanted to start with this idea of shape. So, as an exercise or as a way of working, I'm starting with that strong middle value. Typically, with watercolor, we start with lighter colors and gradually work up to this strong mid value. On certain occasions, I find it helpful and more in keeping with the type of scene that I'm trying to express to actually start with the mid value, the dark mid value, and let it traverse the scene in as natural a way as possible. And then later I will add lights to the whites that are remaining, and indeed some darks into this middle value. So I've created a graded wash here. This is the building on the right-hand side, moving from a burnt sienna with some cad red, putting a strong touch on the bottom of neutral tint. As this grays, you'll see it becomes a smoother transition and evocative of buildings that are receiving light from the ground, in other words, some light bounce. And right away you can see the major shape in the composition is this building extending to over the street and to the left side, and then moving up the buildings on the left side. As I'm extending the shape of this shadow via some strong midtones that separate the buildings and move to the far left of the building on the left side. And I'm starting to feel that sense of a cavern or a deep space between the buildings, pulling me inward. In that space, I'm going to place a delivery truck, which we kept seeing throughout the morning. Typical of the North End, it's seeing these delivery trucks or other service vehicles moving through, guys getting out and taking out a few things, causing a traffic jam and a lot of fuss, and then they move on. All part of the charm of the North End. What am I doing now? Oh yeah, there's a billboard up here. And that billboard was a photograph of something, but more importantly, the light was kind of glancing off of it at an odd angle, creating a brightness in the corner and a kind of ambiguous color, cool color, moving where the image was. So I'm just throwing some strokes up there without any regard for what the image was, thinking again mostly about the shape. This part of the collection of buildings was rather annoying to me because they changed the color. I'm going to keep it kind of I've made a change to keep it a color that is more in keeping with the buildings. Some warm tones, siennas, ochres. Now I'm working in the sky. delivering a light wash of yellow ochre to give a warmth to the sky. On top of that, I'm placing some cobalt blue, and I'm going to transition this cobalt blue a little bit. In other words, I'm going to make it to feel a little darker against the billboard, and as it moves to the right, a little lighter. As it moves down, a little lighter. So it's a good working thought when you're putting in a wash that's of size to find a way to change it from warm to cool, from dark to light. Doesn't matter. If you can bring a change to that, you'll feel that the wash is much more interesting and evocative. Now I'm working into the side of the buildings with some stronger darks. What was going on here was there was another series of billboards that were in the shadows, as well as some designs to the front of the building, windows, doorways near the bottom. And I'm treating this like a pattern, basically, trying to evoke some interesting shapes, still keep the feeling of an old building, extending some of that dark into the lower sections to create more awnings or windows or eaves that run through the building. I look for ways to carry the eye back. A great way to do that is through these awnings, which are larger towards the front of the building, and as they recede towards the back, they get smaller. This helps to really create a draw to the back. Well, moving on with our strong dark tones, this strong dark tone is necessary, I feel, to evoke the feeling of a bright, sunlit day. The long shadows help, but the strength of tone is overall what's going to portray a bright, sunny day and all that goes with it. This same dark I'm going to be using in places on the buildings to the left, mostly to create these windows. Another means of creating depth. They're placed to create a feeling of perspective, a feeling of scale. The brush strokes I'm trying to keep simple. I'm not concerned about dividing the window in half or putting any sort of mullions or draperies or anything like that. It's simply strokes. They're at such a narrow angle anyway that we really couldn't do that. Another excellent location for some of this dark color is the supports for this billboard, and even let it ride up on the right side a little bit. Working into the shadowed area of the building with the same sort of dark, you see how that makes the shadow feel ultimately very transparent. Well, here's another opportunity for one of those awnings. They're nice and dark, which is great because they help to push back everything that's behind them and create a feeling of depth and space after you place them. We'll keep adding some darks here, trying to get that strong tone into the street, some colors, perhaps dancing through the street, some brake lights or a tone to the truck here. Figures are great to give the buildings scale, to reinforce that idea of scale. Working pretty quickly now because I can start to see the painting take a finished look, and I want to get the darks in while I can. They're ultimately what are going to hold this painting together. They're sort of the web that binds these brights and these midtones. The darks are really important in this painting. And of course, I'd like to keep putting more and more. We do something that looks good, and we believe that doing more of that is going to make it look better. Sometimes that's true, and very often it gets us into trouble. So now I'm moving to put some tone into the areas that I've left basically white until this point. I knew I was going to place a wash onto them. I knew it would be a light wash, and I knew it would help to bring out the very light tones, which I'm keeping in some of the buildings. And these are simple, light, warm grays, burnt sienna, a little bit of alizarin. Up in the upper right, I'm using a little more yellow ochre, but they really help to create a feeling of this warm light that's bouncing around in the scene. Have a look at the right-hand side, how that's dried. You can see that the abstract pattern that I was creating is turned out to be effective. It's not overly descriptive and helps to break up that big dark. And the painting is really starting to take on that finished feel. So at this point, I'm sensing that there's not much more really that I want to do. I want to put a few highlights onto the figures so that they stand out a little more. Any sort of signage that I feel will break up this large dark or the distant darks, I'll put that in. A splash of blue here, a splash of red there helps to accentuate the cool grays and the warm grays that are running throughout the painting. Oh, what? I just put some letters on a sign. That's pretty unusual. And no, they're just little swirls of white paint to make it feel like we're looking at a sign. If you try to read it, you'll be forever disappointed because there's nothing there. And we're coming up to the finish of this painting. I can't really see much more that I think will drastically improve the painting. Perhaps some windows up in the upper left side. The light, I feel we captured the light. That's always a major goal for me. And as I said in the beginning, I wanted to accentuate this idea of the big shape that transverses the painting from right to left. This is Salem Street in the North End.